Hey everybody, Marcel Irnie, Racing News. This is a very strong example of hypocrisy from the West and the G7 warmongers, guys. Let's get into it. This is about Iran and Israel and the USA and of course the G7 UK. And here we have David Cameron.
Is it bad judgment or good judgment to hit Iranian sovereign territory in Damascus?
Look, that's something the Israelis decided to do. We haven't made a... I know, well, I'll answer the question, which is, I can completely understand the frustration the Israelis feel when they look at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and they look at the terrible things that they have done all over the world, including the support...
Just like the USA and Britain, all the way back.
They give to Hamas. And of course, Hamas were responsible for October the 7th, and that is where all of this begins. So you can completely understand the frustration.
Yeah, but what about Iran's frustration at part of its sovereign territory being flattened?
Well, I would argue there is a massive degree of difference between what Israel did in Damascus and, as I said, 301 weapons being launched by the state of Iran at the state of Israel. For the first time, a state-on-state attack. 101 ballistic missiles, 36 cruise missiles, 185 drones. That is a degree of difference. Yeah. And I think a reckless and dangerous thing for Iran to have done. And I think the whole world can see all these countries that...
Okay, so there's a big degree of difference. Iran replied to Israel bombing their embassy, their sovereign embassy in Damascus, right? And then Iran makes an attack back. You guys, you broke the code. You broke the code of conduct. You attacked a sovereign country's embassy. And the UN and the World Council all knows that they have the right to strike back. You attacked them first, Iran. Israel attacked Iran.
Somehow wondered, well, what is the true nature of Iran? It's there in black and white.
What would Britain do if a hostile nation flattened one of our consulates?
Well, we would take the very strong action.
If the same thing happened to Britain's consulates, we would take very strong action. Remember those words.
And Iran would say that that's what they did?
Well, what they did, as I said, was a massive attack.
So they were right to...
So from very strong reaction to a massive attack. Well, what is a very strong reaction? What, looking for another Hiroshima?
Respond, but they overreacted, is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the attack they carried out was on a very large scale, much bigger than people accepted.
They have a right to respond.
Well, countries have a right to respond when they feel they've suffered an aggression, of course.
Okay, so they have the right to respond. So Israel attacks the embassy. They start the fight with Iran, and then of course, as per the rules of war and engagement and peace, they have the right to retaliate, which they did.
Of course they do, but look at the scale of that response.
This particular segment from the video unveiled the glaringly hypocritical stance of the West, particularly when dealing with perceived adversaries. Iran, as a member of the United Nations, is entitled to the same protection under international conventions as any other country, including Israel. So why does the West struggle to condemn an attack targeting a diplomatic compound in Syria? Is Israel exempt from the norms of the rule-based international order? It begs the question, who is holding Israel accountable for violating fundamental diplomatic protocols on the international stage? The current international order seems heavily skewed in favor of certain nations, leaving others to bear the brunt of the actions of the privileged few. If the West truly aimed to uphold the integrity of the international order, it would press Israel to either compensate for its actions or face sanctions for its transgressions.
And this brings us right back to the USA's aggression over many years towards Russia. The big bag, the boogeyman, Putin. And so US, the NATO, they set up missile defense systems, missile attack systems all around Russia in Ukraine. They break the treaty where you do not move your military industrial 1 foot closer to Putin's borders, and then the USK keeps doing it. They have all the 36 biolabs in Ukraine, along with the money laundering, the child slavery, the human trafficking. There's a good documentary actually that covers that. Done by Mel Gibson. Everyone should watch that. And then the people of Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, who are Russian ethnic people, are bombed. 10,000 people murdered, genocide, and they ask help from somebody. And guess who comes to the aid? Putin, as one part of what he was doing, and to give them a sovereign nation, which they are going to have. And yeah, the irony is just so strong, so strong.
Yet the West shielded Israel even when the Security Council called for condemnation. Such brazen hypocrisy tarnishes the international image of the West. Despite their impassioned speeches at the onset of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, one would have expected a different approach this time around. However, the West continues to treat Israel with a sense of exceptionalism, allowing it to act with impunity. This not only jeopardizes global peace, but also poses significant risks to stability in the Middle East. Witness David Cameron's live embodiment of this hypocrisy once more.
Where are you on the Iranian view that this was only as...
Well, look, I think if you look at the scale of what Iran was trying to do, 110 ballistic missiles, 36 cruise missiles, 185 drones, it's sometimes portrayed, this attack, as a sort of drone swarm. But actually, the use of ballistic missiles in a state-on-state attack is a very significant move by Iran. Very dangerous, very reckless. Fortunately, it was an almost total failure, but I don't think it was...
And was it reckless of Israel to just randomly bomb the consulate to start all this, to give them the legal right to... I mean, what did all this happen in the first place? Hamas, attacked Israel, and now Israel has been attacking the Gaza, wiping out the Gaza, like literally destroying it. And then they're, that's okay though, because they attacked first. And then now Israel attacks Iran first, and then Iran's reply is too much. Like the hypocrisy. So that should be the title.
Justified in any way by reference to what happened in Damascus. But look, I think now the most important thing, the Israeli War Cabinet has been meeting. They have every right to respond, and you'd understand that as an Israeli citizen, you'd be thinking, my country came under attack, we must respond. We're asking them as their friends to think with head as well as heart, to be smart as well as tough, to recognize Iran has failed, and the best way to de-escalate this situation is not to attack back, but instead to focus on Hamas's failure to release the hostages and the failure to agree to a pause in the fighting in Gaza, because we badly need to get aid in there and get the hostages home.
I will come back one last time to that question, though. If Israel was responsible for the bombing in Damascus, are you critical of that?
Well, it's a matter for Israel. We haven't made a comment on it. The only thing I'd say is,
why no comment, Lord Cameron?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because if you look at what the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has done. They are the people that have been backing Hamas, who carried out the horrific October the 7th attack. They are the people who've been backing the Houthis, bombing ships in the Red Sea, irrespective of what country they come from. They are the people that back Hezbollah, launching missiles into Israel and causing, remember, there are about 100,000 people in the north of Israel who can't go to their homes because of Hezbollah. So it cannot...
So we're going back into history. I wonder if we should talk about all history then. The history of what Britain, the UK, the G7, the history of the USA, the warmongers, the military-industrial complex.
I understand Israel's frustration with the IRGC. Yes, I absolutely can. Do I think Iran's response with this state-on-state attack was justified? No, it wasn't. Unfortunately, it was an almost total failure.
But it wasn't justified to bomb an embassy in Damascus, was it?
As I say, I'm not getting into what Israel has or hasn't done.
Can we talk a little bit about the IRGC here in the UK? The former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was on this show last week. She believes it become a proscribed organisation. My understanding is that Labour says the same. Where are you on that, Lord Cameron?
Well, we recognise what a dangerous organisation it is. We have sanctioned it in its entirety. We put in place a whole sanctions regime before the end of last year.
Lord Cameron, we've talked about the need and the brilliance of the RAF in shooting down drones and missiles over Iraq and Syria. Why can't they do it over Ukraine?
Well, it's a very good question. Look, we've done more than any other country, I think, individually to help the Ukrainians. We've trained 60,000 Ukrainian troops. We were the first to give them anti-tank weapons, long-range artillery and tanks. I think the difficulty with what you suggest is if you want to avoid an escalation in terms of a wider European war, I think the one thing you do need to avoid is NATO troops directly engaging Russian troops. That would be a danger of escalation. So I've said, both here in the UK, but more importantly to all our allies around the world, is do everything you can to support Ukraine in terms of money, in terms of diplomacy, and crucially in terms of weapons. Giving them weapons to defend themselves, training their troops, those are absolutely the right things to do, and we've done more of that than anyone. But actually putting NATO forces directly in conflict with Russian forces, I think that would be a dangerous escalation.
Well, why not shoot down unmanned drones, Lord Cameron?
Well, we are doing everything we can to help Ukrainians shoot down unmanned drones, and that is what they've
but we do it for Israel, but not Ukraine.
To do. Well, actually, what we're doing is an interesting question. What we're doing in with respect to Israel is filling in for the Americans in terms of Opsheda, and then using our jets, if they can, to shoot down missiles.
It brings you back to the question is, so why is there so much unconditional warmongering support for Israel? There's so much support for Ukraine, but even more for Israel. That begs the question.
Drones.
These individuals have become so accustomed to deception that they often neglect to adhere to their professed principles of the rule-based international order. Cameron's failure to provide a straightforward response regarding the UK's reaction to an attack on its embassy was telling. The pivotal question altered the entire discourse. Similarly, the struggle to maintain honesty was evident when Home Office Minister Laura Farris acknowledged the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, as a malign force, but stopped short of labeling it a terrorist organization to avoid disrupting communication channels with Iran. Yet, the government sanctions the IRGC, hindering its participation in normal international affairs while endorsing Israel's aggressive actions against it.
Nobody is denying that they are a malign force. We have repeatedly sanctioned both individual commanders and the IRGC more generally, so that puts very severe restrictions on their ability to move and on other freedoms that they would have had. And we're not suggesting that they're not a problem. I think I saw David Cameron was on your show yesterday.
He was.
And one of the things he's been saying more widely is that at the moment we have a direct diplomatic channel, a direct line of communication to Tehran. Even though relations are difficult and those conversations are not always easy, there is actually something positive about being able to have face-to-face diplomatic relations. And at this point in time, there is something for that. But look, the Prime Minister said, he made a statement to the House yesterday, he's been talking very closely with all his G7 counterparts. He spoke to Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday too. All of this stuff remains under review. All of it is part of what's being considered along with further sanctions. So,
well, should we be communicating in that way with a terrorist group, basically, which is what so many people are suggesting that they are?
I'm not suggesting that they're not a problematic presence, but there is something, and this is what David Cameron spoke about, and as Foreign Secretary, this is, I think, something that he'll have a direct sense of. There is something important about being able to have a direct communication, even with the most difficult states. And, one of the things, Kay, and you'll know this better than anyone, this is a unique moment of tension in the Middle East and for the wider region. Everything is focused on cool heads, avoiding de-escalation. And at this point in time, the Foreign Secretary has said he values having a direct channel of communication to Tehran. As I say, we already sanction them, though. It's problematic. I accept that, but we already impose sanctions on them. It remains under review. So, I don't think there's any disagreement on the principle of what you're saying, Kay, simply that this is something that is being worked through with the G7 partners.
Liam Fox said last night that Iran orchestrated the crisis in Gaza because it didn't like the normalization of relations between Israel and Arab states. In other words, they're poking the bear. Is that your view? Do you agree with what he's saying?
Look, I think that is a sensible construction of some of the impulses that lay behind October the 7th. But it is extraordinary to see the more than 300 missiles were focused on Israel. If they hadn't been intercepted, they would have had catastrophic consequences, a loss of life.
But they did give 48 hours notice.
They did, but if they hadn't been intercepted, that was ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, some of the most serious arsenal that you can possibly use.
If they meant for them to cause significant harm, why would they have given notice?
It is not guaranteed that the defence system would have worked perfectly. It is absolutely manifestly clear that if you fire 300 of the most serious arsenal at any state, it is an extreme act.
It sounds like Israel's or Iran saying, hey, we're going to give you a warning. We have the most missiles in the world. We have the most advanced weaponry. Iran has been building its weaponry and developing the technology, as one of the leaders in the world. You guys attack our embassy. You straightforwardly attack the embassy. We're going to just give you a demonstration. And that's what she's just explaining. It was a demonstration. They gave them 48 hours notice that we're going to shoot some missiles at you and see if your systems are going to work. We're going to test your system. Really quite interesting.
Of aggression.
I understand that, but I wonder why they gave so much notice, do you think?
Well, look, we know that this is an intensifying issue. That's why the Prime Minister has called for cool heads. Everything is focused on avoiding an escalation. But it is very shocking. You know, Iran has done this in its own backyard. These are Middle Eastern countries that are now...
So it was an act of terrorism, and yet, potentially, and yet you won't say that the IRGC is a terrorist group.
Well, I've said that they are a malign force. We have been sanctioning them periodically since 2021, 2022, 2023. I was looking at the sequence of the sanctions, and actually we know, for example, they had involvement in Russia in supplying weapons that were used in Ukraine. So we have been taking very tough measures with them, and this is not
but those that would do their bidding in the form of Hamas, who say that they are terrorists.
Yes, but there's a different context there. Hamas isn't simply a tool of the IRGC. Hamas has and Hezbollah have a different relationship with Israel, and that's something that has a slightly different context. But as I say, the effort within the Foreign Office and the MOD is on working closely with our G7 partners and with the State of Israel.
Ultimately, the West's covert support for Israel has fueled the feared regional crisis that the world has endeavored to prevent for decades. Israel's attempts to directly target Iran through bombings have gained traction following retaliatory actions, prompting Iran to shift from strategic patience to a resolute stance against its adversary. If this cycle of retaliation escalates unchecked, it risks plunging the region into open conflict to the detriment of all, including the West. It's astonishing how diplomacy and deterrence have been relegated to secondary concerns. Thank you for joining us today. To expand.
Well, there you have it, guys. Just a quick summary of the hypocrisy going on right now in the military-industrial complex. War is peace. It's so this voice here reminds me of when I'm listening to the 1984 book on tape. It's like the same voice, and it's talking about the same thing, but in not 1984, in 2024, guys. 40 years later, exact same position. This is exactly how world wars, how everything about all previous wars, Vietnam, Iraq, Syria, freaking Afghanistan, they're all lies. Everyone is being told lies. People are dying for politicians' wars, their politician lies. Imagine the lies that evolve around World War II. I encourage everyone to go do some serious research into the Vietnam War, Afghanistan, Iraq, but go all the way back to World War II, guys. You'll see the hypocrisy of why everyone really is dying. You'll see how the war actually started. Really go into it. Who attacked first? What actually started the chain of events? Where is the evidence of the firebombing from Britain on Germany? I bet most people haven't even looked at and seen that Britain firebombed Germany in the very beginning, before the war even got close to starting. Well, I wonder why. Who was not in the banking system? Who got out of Britain under their shell of paying them reparations? How did Germany get out of the depression? How did Germany create their own currency? Germany was not under the thumb of Britain, not under the thumb of the Jewish bankers, the oligarchs. and they were pissed off. Irnieracing News, guys. Food for thought.